Okay, now we're going to have two back-to-back panels, really a all-star group of panelists here. And the first issue we're going to tackle is an issue that many of our opening speakers spoke of, which is what's the end of education? What's the ultimate goal? And I think most of us would argue that that goal is really to get into a good job, to figure out where, you know, as Ron said, what's your vocation? What's your calling? How are you going to pursue that? The problem we have today is that huge numbers of our young people don't have those jobs. We have near record levels of unemployment and underemployment. And our next panel is going to go right and look at that issue. Where are the jobs for young adults? And our moderator, we couldn't have a better moderator for this panel. Jonas Prising is president of ManpowerGroup. And Jonas, if there's anybody who understands what's going on in the global economy, it's Jonas. He was born in Sweden, worked in Sweden for quite a while, joined Manpower. He's been with Manpower pretty much in every country in the world. He's constantly traveling. He just flew in from Paris last night. So he brings a very global perspective to this issue. And he's joined by Andy Sum, professor at Northeastern University and director of the Center for Labor Market Studies, one of the nation's most eminent experts on youth unemployment. Jane Oates, Assistant Secretary for Employment and Training at the U.S. Department of Labor. Moorthy Uppaluri from Microsoft, who's their leading expert on what's going on in the IT economy. Dave Bozeman, Vice President of Integrated Manufacturing Operations for Caterpillar, and Rick Stevens, Senior Vice President in charge of Human Resources for the Boeing Company. So please join me in welcoming this distinguished panel.
Thank you very much, Bill, and good morning, everyone. I am delighted to be here to moderate this eminent panel of experts and thought leaders as well as business leaders. So before we start, I wanted to frame the issue around this mismatch of an educational pipeline and changing demands by employers and organizations. Because in the end, to express this in business terms, there is a mismatch between demand and supply. When the demand and supply mismatch occurs, unemployment is created. According to the ILO, there are about 200 million people unemployed today. Unemployment for any society and any individual is very painful. Out of those 200 million, 50 million are young people unemployed, so people under the age of 25. Youth unemployment is a disaster for individuals as well as nations, because it creates a wage scar and a generational scar that travels with that generation all the way, ripples through the economy, their personal lives, their family lives, their consumer lives, all the way through. So we heard at the very beginning from Nick that there is a mismatch in the US. We have 600,000 open jobs, and yet we have lots of young people and people in general unemployed. As I said, as Bill mentioned, last week I spent in Italy, France, and Spain. This is a global issue. Unemployment is a global issue. And of course, in those three countries, you have 55% unemployment for young people in Spain, 37% in Italy, and 25% in France. A terrible, terrible tragedy for those countries. But even in emerging markets, you are seeing, you know, a mismatch between the available skills and demand from organizations, as emerging markets are competing globally. Now, Bill asked a very critical question. He rattled off a list of initiatives and subjects that we have been discussing for some time and wondered, so what have we done? Why has nothing changed? I believe the reason we haven't changed is that, generally speaking, economic cycles took care of high levels of unemployment. When the economic cycles improved, unemployment went down. From everything that we can see, as we meet millions of job seekers and employ hundreds of thousands of people in the US that are below the age of 25, we can see that the economic cycle is not going to sort out this problem when it starts to grow again. There are structural issues, and some of the previous speakers spoke about those structural issues just a moment ago. Technology accelerates change and evens out the playing field, so you compete not only in Milwaukee, but you compete with everybody globally, whether you are a global company or not. Demographic changes with an aging workforce means there is demand for certain skills, but other skills are disappearing at a faster rate than what is being produced. And the effects of globalization, where we are competing with rapidly growing economies, is changing the equation as well. So there are structural changes that are affecting the way unemployment is going to be evolving over time. And I'd like to ask Andy to come and talk to us about the research that's been done over the last decades that can start to illustrate those structural changes, so we can set the scene for the discussion in a little moment with the panel. Andy?
Thank you very much. As part of my presentation for this morning, I put together a set of slides, and we'll try to make sure that we cover them all in the time that we're allotted over here before I get the hook on this. What I wanted to do in my remarks is really to focus on kind of why we're here in some sense. And that is, I'm going to focus on what's happened really to the labor market for teenagers and young adults in the United States, not just over the last 10 to 12 years, but at the very end, taking you back some 30 years to take a look, particularly at the relative earnings position of young workers and their ability to afford to move into their own households, to marry, to take care of their children, and to avoid high rates of poverty and low income inadequacy among so many of our children today. And if I had time left, I'll send them to you. I got 2 songs. Ron had his poems. We got one called the Atomic Dropout Blues. Those of you that ever remember the old song Atomic Dog, okay, that's my rendition of it, okay? And those of you that are country western, I have my Mama, Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Dropouts, okay? Okay. And last of all, for my poem, Robert Frost, two career paths diverged in the woods, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Okay, so where basically has the difference been? So I'm going to try to lay out in my presentation, I'm going to cover 5 major points. Okay, those 5 points are listed up there so you could see what I hope to achieve, and then I'm going to walk you through each one of these. One is just a little story about what I call the great age twist in employment rates in the United States over the last 12 years. We have never seen anything like this in our entire lives, about how much we've altered the age structure of employment. Then I'm going to tell a little story about what's happened to teenagers' work rates, what's happened to their ability to find jobs. And it's not only the fact that they're finding jobs at a much lower rate, but they've been cut out of certain sectors. Then what's happened to the ability of young adults who don't go on to college to make that transition to the labor market? How well are they doing that, getting jobs, getting established early in life? What's happened to our 20 to 24-year-olds? Are they catching up after the 16 to 19-year-olds fell down? Are they catching up and getting ahead? And then the last 3 tell a story about wages and why I think that story of wages is so important for us to understand what we need to look beyond just getting kids jobs, or what are we doing for their overall standard of living. I'm going to show you that the average young man in the United States today makes less per week than he did in 1965. In 1965. So it's been back to the future for these young adults. So what do we have to do? Okay, so first thing I'm going to start out is tell you this little story that right here, if you see this graph. On this graph right here, what I've done is just laid out what's been happening to employment rates in the United States by single age group. So remember, this is between the last 2 years, 1999, 2000, when we're at the peak of our boom, and the 2 most recent years, 2011 and 2012. And all I've done is I've ranked you at the top. That's 10-point change in your EP rate. Then it goes down to 0, and then below 0 all the way down to 20. Now remember, if everybody had no change at all in the employment rate, we'd just have a straight line going straight across at 0, okay? Remember to watch the old TV TV shows, got that straight line across, you know you're dead. Well, in this case right here, it would imply everybody's dying at the same rate, okay? All right, but the fact of the matter is what's happened. Now, when you look at that chart, you could see what's happened, and it's a pretty amazing story. And that is everybody under the age of 55 was working less today in the last 2 years than they were in 1999, 2000. And the younger you were, the less likely you were to be working. So see those kids, 16, 17, and 18 are working 20 points less than they used to just a decade ago. If you're over 55, you're more likely to be working. That's true of both men and women. So we've created this great age twist where today you're more likely to be working when you're older than 55. We used to use 55 for older, and I call this after I reached that, I now call us mature workers. Us mature workers over the age of 55 are working more than before. And the size of these gaps are just been unprecedented. The last thing to think about on that, think of it like this. I gave a talk about a year and a half ago when I was given this award for doing research on youth employment. And what I showed simply was the following. If you were a 16 or 17-year-old boy back in 2000, you were twice as likely to be working as your grandfather. Okay, by the time we get to 2011 and 2012, grandfathers are 70% more likely to be working than 16 to 17-year-old boys. That's how much this country has changed. Okay, now that's the big views, kind of saying we have thrown more young people out of the labor market than ever before. How are we doing for teenagers? Well, there's the result. Next chart over, I'm sorry. That one there was just a percent equivalent to what I had on the absolute chart before, so I'll pass that one back. Sorry, going back over here and just telling the story. What has been happening to the employment rates of teenagers? Okay, if you go back to 2000, about 46 out of every 100 teenagers in the country were working during an average month. And by the way, even though that was up a lot during the early 90s, we had 5 really good years under Clinton, we never got back to the peak that we had back in 1989. But as time goes by, you could see when we went into recession and jobless recovery, the rate falls to 37. During the Great Recession, it falls to 26.8. Last year, it fell to 26.2. 26.2 is the lowest teen employment rate we've had in our history since the end of World War II. Never have so few teenagers ever worked. The declines have been greater for men than they have been for women, although both groups suffered big declines. But women are now more likely to work than men at every single age, 16, 17, 18, and 19. So what we've done is really destroyed many job opportunities for males. And young adults, unlike most people think, who works among our young adults, the answer is quite clear, which is the fact the higher your family income is until you get over to 200,000, the greater is the likelihood that you work in high school. The lower your income, the less likely you are to work. Kids who need work the most get it the least in the United States. We've got to attack that problem. Well, what about trying to make the transition over to when you get out of school? What happens to the ability to make the transition to the labor market? So let me tell you that story very, very quickly. Okay, is that the right one? I can't see it up here. Is it say 69.6? That first one? Okay. All right. So these are young adults graduated from high school and did not go to college and are trying to make it to the world of work. How successful were they making it to the world of work? And here you could see back in 2000, 70 out of 100 had a job. By the time we get to 2003, it's down to 58. By the time we get to 2009, it's 45, and last October it was 45.6. That is only 46 out of every 100 new high school grads had any type of job. Now, when you go to the next one, it says combine that with whether or not they got a full-time job. When you combine it with whether they got a full-time job, fewer than half of all those working had a full-time job. The full-time EP rate is 21 out of 100. If you were a black high school graduate trying to make it in the labor market, 7 out of 100 had a full-time job. 25 out of 100 whites. Those are the lowest rates, again, we've ever had in our history on the ability to make a transition since the data series started in 1965. Last 3 things. One is on the employment rate for among 20 to 24-year-olds. Young adults were not able to make up for the gains they lost from 72 all the way down to 68, and today's 61.5%. So only 60 out of every 100 young adults, I have 40 seconds, 60 out of every 100 adults in the United States are working today. And again, I want to beat this to death. That is the lowest employment rate we've had for young adults in our history since the end of World War II. Now, the losses in those employment rates have varied by educational group. The less educated you are, the more you lost. Everybody has lost ground. College grads have lost the least ground. But the key thing I'll just say for this is the following. Too high a share of our young college graduates are leaving college in jobs that don't require a college degree. Only 6 out of every 10 BAs that are employed under the age of 25 had a college labor market degree. The last one, I won't go through all those. Let me just tell you this story very quickly. 30 seconds, I'm done, Ron. Okay? These are what happened to the median weekly wages of 18 to 24-year-old full-time workers in the United States. These are men and those are women. The real wages of young men and women peaked in 1973. That was their all-time high. It's 1973. They went down for 25 consecutive years. It went up only 5 years, 1990 to 1995 to 2000, and are back on their downward trajectory again today. So our young adults are making less money than they did in 30 years. If you take a look at young men relative to older men, and I think that's what Hillary was saying, what you find is the following. Back in 1967, a young man used to make 67% of what adult men made. Today, the average young man makes only 50% of what they used to make 74%. Today they make 50%. Now, let me end on that note. If you take a look at this song by Paul McCartney, Yesterday, there's a sign in there that says, there's a line in the song that goes, suddenly, I was only half the man I used to be. Well, in the United States, suddenly, we're only 2/3 the man I used to be. And the last thing, I'm done. The last chart over there, the last chart over there tells a very interesting story about what the world would have looked like if young men had just been able to manage their wage gains from 1967 to 73 to where they are today. Now you see where they are today? If we had kept those rates up, the average young man's wage would not have been $443, which is what it was in 2010. It would have been $1,014. So just ask yourself the question, what a different world this would have been if we had maintained our growth during the golden age of the American economy. So the question is, how do we get back on track and restore the American dream for all those young people? Thank you.
So with that, you can clearly see the data supporting the need for a Sputnik moment is pretty evident. There are changes that are structural, and that's what we now as a panel are going to be talking about. You know, what does this look like from an organizational perspective? What does this look like from a labor market perspective? And I'd like to start with you, Rick, and ask you, so lots of things have changed. Has everything changed? As an employer, with Boeing employing many thousands of people, hiring 9,000 people last year, what do you see happening between this mismatch?
I think, and I appreciate the question and the context. I'm not an economist, but I do, worry about hiring people. I've run businesses most of my career, led HR for the last 8 years. We have 175,000 employees. We've hired 33,000 people in the last 2 years. We'll hire another 20,000 in the next 2 years. We put 9,000 employees in the factory building airplanes. What's really interesting, if we look over the last 10 years, the amount of training that we have to do to get employees ready to go in the factory has now doubled. As opposed to be just 7 weeks, it now takes us 14 weeks. Our observation is we have a great education system for allowing kids to be able to find out about any piece of information on the internet, but being able to apply it and apply that in the real world is a huge deficit. And so a lot of the work that we do, and you're going to hear from 5 other people on the discussions today about some of the work going on with the Illinois Career Pathways. Frankly, from a business standpoint, our focus is how do we in business now get the workforce ready for the future? How do we go partner and work the alignment? Because frankly, spending more money at the K through 12 level, in our view, is not going to solve the problem. And the relationships we have at the community college level or at the high school level, and you'll hear more about it, said the Illinois Career Pathways, we're actually writing 9 curriculum to go into all the high schools across Illinois, and then our plan is to be able to have those industries go higher. And I won't go through all the other details, but frankly, we're struggling, and our view is it's not about spending more money in education, and I know some would reel at that, but if I pulled some data out from the Andy Casey Foundation this morning, just looking at how much we are spending at the K through 12 level on an annual basis. Certainly the highest ranked states, 1 through 10, tend to spend more than those who are ranked at the bottom, but I'll tell you, state of Colorado, in terms of the ranking of the students, number 9 in the nation. Okay, they spend $9,000 per student. And I would tell you, Alaska, Louisiana, West Virginia, New Mexico, all spend more than that, and they are clearly at the bottom. I would contend it's more than about what goes on in education. We need the right relationships, because if we just continue to spend money on education, we're not going to solve it. We have to get the right incentives in place for our students to know they got a job. And oh, by the way, I will also tell you, I think we focus too much on our kids going to college. It ought to be about first getting a job and then go get the education to match that. And when we have those right discussions, students do in fact achieve and can be successful.
Mm-hmm. So what about you at Caterpillar, Dave? What do you see in terms of the flow of talent and the supply of talent that you need to run your business?
Yeah, thanks, Jonas. First of all, humbled to be here with the panel. I think it's been some enlightening discussion so far today. I think from a Caterpillar perspective, similar to my colleague here at Boeing, we see a couple things, and I'll just throw something out. A number of you know that for the first time, we probably have more people that are moving to the city than have lived in the rural areas. It's kind of officially crossed over. And why is that relevant? One of the things we notice is that the workforce is different, and we have to adapt to it as well. But the mechanical aptitude that we see in students has really changed over the decades. It used to be a time where a person can change a tire, change spark plugs, work on a tractor, which we like the yellow ones, right? So, you know. But there's just a number of things that young people used to do as far as being mechanically not afraid of really touching things and figure out how they work. Our society has kind of moved to where they are afraid. I call it scar tissue on math. We're afraid to really touch math, right? Why? We all in this room, we in industry, I think can help by really breaking that scar tissue and really getting people and young people not afraid of aptitude. It's okay to do that. When you look at the training we spend in Caterpillar, tons of training, we spend thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in training that we do, not only just to enhance further degrees or training on the shop floor, but that's not counting the millions of dollars we spend around the world globally, 200 output facilities and local communities that we're in having those partnerships. I say to this room, make sure we're partnering in actually what I call Go See Act. Actually coming out to and partnering with industry to see exactly what we're seeing when young people come in. It's a different workforce, not motivated like the workforce of yesterday, and we have to do something about that. And what we've decided to do, I was telling the story in India. I can't exactly go out and get certified welders in the middle of Thiruvallur, India, in a plant we have. So we've started our own development center in which we take a person that's never welded before, and in several months we're going to convert them to be a Caterpillar certified welder. And that's just one example of industry really looking to enhance and train individuals. So the workforce has changed, Jonas.
Right.
We have to adapt to that and be very, very aggressive at changing the awareness of young people. And I think we all have to push that.
Excellent. So Jane, you would have a really broad view of the labor market, not only manufacturing, which is about 11 or 12% of the workforce today, but a much larger pool, of course, of the other parts, notwithstanding the multiplier effect that Nick was mentioning earlier. So what are you seeing from the supply side, and what is occurring in terms of the people coming into the workforce, and the trends that you're observing from a broader national perspective?
Well, I think some of the things you see with young workers, especially, or prospective workers, they're very aligned with business in one clear area: time. They want something immediate, just like business wants. I was amazed to hear that Caterpillar, these are all the high water marks of business, from Nick to the folks on this panel. They're out there doing this stuff. But, you heard in India, they're willing to take somebody without the skills and employ them and train them as an incumbent worker. But here they talk about a skills gap. So we need to really figure out how we get corporate consciousness to say they're willing to do the same thing with a young worker. Because young people, the best way we can serve young people is to give them lots of options. So, and I have to applaud Boeing. Many of you may be aware of our community college capacity building program. Boeing, Rick, I don't know whether you want me to say this because they could all come running to you, actually gave Air Washington a plane. You talk about relevance. When kids at the community college in Seattle can be trained on a Boeing plane, that's not simulation, that's not textbook, that's real. And how do we get that relevance in? I would say the same thing, Caterpillar's doing a lot of hiring in our southern states. Some of those kids, they know they fell in love with front-end diggers through Bob the Builder. They're kind of afraid to get their hands dirty because while they were in high school working for Caterpillar or John Deere or some of the other folks in that line wasn't seen as important. Right. And yet we need to bring the relevance in of what are they making. How do we educate through labor market information young people today in what the earnings are? How do we get a U.S. News World and Report to look at high schools and 2- and 4-year colleges in terms of earnings, what their graduates made, rather than where they went in the next educational step? So I think that's where I see changes, and I see changes. Why somebody from the federal government here? Don't ask that question. But we need to break down the silos. Just like in educational settings, teachers, faculty used to be the people who wrote curriculum. Now it has to be business that comes in and helps design the curriculum and, in my opinion, deliver it. But in the federal government, I can't worry just about people who come to my door at labor. I have to work with my partners at education, my partners at commerce and small business, my partners at the National Science Foundation and NIH, so that we're looking at labor at commercialization and tech transfer as it relates to the workforce. So right. I think it's a changing world, and we shouldn't be afraid of globalization. We should embrace it. We should tell every dropout that they could be coming home from Paris just like you and Nick were, because right. There is, I think Hillary said something that really resonated. There is no wrong door. There is no wrong time. So right. I think that's what we have to kind of immortalize in government and as well as in business.
Right. Hey, Jonas, can I just one thing when we talk about image, and I'll speak a little bit for Boeing here. You can tackle over here. When you look in these facilities, Caterpillar, Boeing, and a number of other industry in here, these are multi-million-dollar assets in facilities that are cleaner than most office buildings. And I could tell you, the image, that's part of the issue. The image of manufacturing and business is probably completely different to most in this room. And I tell you, when you walk in and see that, safety being number one, you have a safe work environment with assets that are more than most would ever see. And the companies, they put trust in people who know how to work those. And so I would venture to say, just go out and see some of this. It'll probably even open up the eyes in this room of what we're talking about here. Right. And I love what Nick said in Snap-on. What he didn't say is his line that says, "Thou shalt now sell to amateurs." I've heard him talk before. But the point being, this can be surgical stuff here, and there's no young person who wouldn't want to work in an environment like that. Right.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And we talked to Jane. You talked about globalization and how this is all hanging together. I know, Moorthy, that's something that your organization, Microsoft, has been working a lot with, and you've been quite vocal about the lack of skills needed to do the work that you need done here in the U.S. and the options that you may have to be able to address that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Looking at Microsoft itself, we have close to 10,000 job applications that we receive every month. And if you look at the open positions, it's about 13,000 as it stands last week. 6,000 of those jobs are here in US alone. So what I'm trying to say is, even though we have the jobs, you can't fill those jobs with the skills that you have and the talent. So the huge talent gap. So Microsoft chases wherever the talent is. And looking at the global economy, as Jane was alluding to, it's a great opportunity to do business across the world. However, it is not the cost arbitrage that Microsoft or companies like Microsoft would be chasing anymore, because the cost arbitrage or the honeymoon lasts only so long because of the inflation and what have you. The dynamics are totally different. So we understand that it is the talent, and it is the global talent that really makes this party happen. It's an orchestration of the various instruments, as I call it, so that you need all of these to really make this beautiful concert. We have done quite a bit of work, Jonas, if I may cite, with the Washington Workforce Council, which alludes to several points that Jane has spoken to or Nick has alluded to in terms of bringing the entire ecosystem of the businesses, the educational institutes, and the government to play to create a difference at the grassroots level, at the community level. Because I think while the constituents are the same, I think the formula or the recipe is going to be different for different states or for different areas of the world. So it needs to be, the recipe has to be built at the grassroots level depending upon the needs in that community to create to reduce the gap between the supply and demand. So we feel very encouraged with the opportunities that we have both at home and globally.
Okay. No, so we talk a lot about this talent and skills match and the 600,000 jobs and the specific job openings that you have here. But I know from speaking with labor economists before, and that there is an argument, looking back at historical data, that this is all about supply and demand. And when demand is strong enough, supply will occur because it's so strong. Prices will rise, the wages will rise, and we will sort this problem out really through a cycle more than anything else, as has occurred ever since the Second World War. What would you say to that, Andy? Is that a theorem that you can still apply looking ahead, or is that looking backwards, not taking into account some of the structural changes that have occurred in the economy and with employers who can do and will always strive to do more with less and drive for higher productivity?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have an easy answer to that. I would say, though, there are two things. One is, if we had, those of you in the audience may not like my answer, but basically, if we had these skills shortages, then tell me, how come wages are not rising? Okay? Right? In the past, the world always worked that way. How to identify a skills shortage? Wages go up. And Minnesota just did this survey of engineering, manufacturing, and other jobs. They find 7 out of 10 vacancies have nothing to do with a skills shortage. In fact, more of the shortages are due to lack of paying adequate wages and adequate job opportunities for workers. And the fact is that workers don't find a job that interesting. Now, I'm just trying to be honest about it, but I mean, this is what they're telling us. Okay?
There's a reason I asked you. I thought this was the line you might go down. Okay. So this is going to cause a very interesting and good, lively debate, which is what this is about.
But the last thing, though, is this. We all started out, I know, as a teenager. I first started out as a newspaper boy, and then I was in retail trade. I did that. And then when I was 18, I got to work at U.S. Steel. And we used to say that you became a man at age 18. You got a man's job for once. But if you take a look at what we do in manufacturing, we have thrown out 3/4 of all teenagers, men and women, out of the manufacturing sector in the last 12 years. 70%. By the way, we've thrown out 80% in finance. 80%. So if we want our kids to learn manufacturing, you know how to do it? Introduce them to manufacturing. And not simulate the job, give them the job. And let's do a lot more getting young people a chance to work in many more sectors than we give them now. 3/4 of all kids work in retail trade, fast food, or entertainment. You think that's the wave of the future? Sorry, I don't. If we want the wave of the future, let's get started earlier, giving kids a chance to get exposed to more jobs so that they decide what they want to do the rest of their life.
Okay. Thank you, and that is something I hear a lot from economists. But I see that Rick, you're raising your hand. So the question would be, okay, so what is up with supply and demand mechanics? Why don't they work in the way that they have done in the past, from your perspective as an employer?
I think they're working exactly the way free markets work. There's a change that occurred in the mid-'80s, and we all watched the Berlin Wall come down. But at the same time, there are 2 billion people added to the job market because of the internet, and information became a commodity. And as a result, supply and demand is working. Talk to any global supplier, talk to my partner here at CAT or Microsoft. They're trying to compete in a marketplace. You're trying to deliver goods and services around the world, and it's a different set of equation. When you add 2 billion people to the job market outside of the U.S., and we're still telling all of our kids, go to college, and as a result, you'll get a job, I think we've missed it completely. It ought to be first, let's go figure out what your job is, then get the education necessary to get there. Why do we have $1 trillion worth of college debt and all of the people not employed? That's a fundamental issue. I think supply and demand is working perfectly, but it's now a global market. It used to be a U.S. market. Now, look at steel, look at automotive, look at textiles. What do those get produced? Why? Because skills are very capable outside of the U.S. market, and we're not able to compete. I'm in one of the last industries that still there's only a duopoly. There's Airbus and Boeing. And like between John Deere and Cat, Airbus and Boeing. Let me tell you, there are 3 other competitors after our business right now. China with Comac, Embraer in Brazil, okay, and Bombardier in Canada. And why? And they are investing national resources to go get a workforce ready to upgrade their regional jets to go build a 737 size airplane. So it is all about how you go compete in the marketplace, and I don't think we as parents, we as business, we as a nation have shared with our young people that their success is being able to go compete in the job market. I invite all of you to go watch a video that came out 2 or 3 years ago, 2 million minutes. If you've not seen it, go watch it. It compares 2 students in the US versus 2 students in China versus 2 students in India, and 2 million minutes, just to give you an idea, is what occurs over 4 years in high school. There's a whole different perspective, and until we change that inflection, we're not going to be successful. So I think the supply and demand is working very well.
Moorthy?
Yeah, I have something to add. Most of us must have heard about the massively open online courses that are happening out there. And we also are familiar with how the learning paradigm is shifting completely, and the teaching paradigm has to catch up with it. I see, as most of us have spoken about, the skill-based learning and the project-based learning. When that comes into play to supplement this MOOC learning, I think it will solve a significant portion of the gap. 1, and 2, there should be a proper segmentation of the education channels that lead to the job markets across different verticals. I think there has been a mad, crazy traffic mismatch that's happening in terms of people seeking only certain types of jobs. When I was probably much younger and going to school, we used to think about only 2 possible careers. Either you can become an engineer or a doctor. It's kind of misinformed. So there is so many job opportunities, so many career paths that people can pursue. We are talking about manufacturing, skill-based, or IT, and the glamour that is associated with these kinds of jobs. But I think the comprehensive 360 development of an economy would happen with these multiple paths, and that kind of a channeling should happen right from the schooling with the proper segmentation and the curricula being built to meet those demands across the nation.
But I think we need to get the employers on board to do either what's done at Andy's home institution, co-ops, or paid internships, some kind of real experience, because what they have, I believe in the promise of MOOCs, I believe in the promise of doing all of our remedial kinds of education and developmental education online or in a hybrid form. I think that's all the wave of the future. But my real concern is that kids need to have the real work experience, whether in school or dropouts, and they need to have something of substance on their resume. I mean, nobody's going to want to see a resume that has a kid taking all online courses in the privacy of his handheld device or her handheld device, because at the same time, all of these employers say they want you to have the soft skills, they want you to be able to work in a team, they want you to be able to do analysis on the job site. The only way to prove that on your resume is to have real work experience. And I think the more we can push employers to kind of say, hire these kids temporarily, give them a paid internship, give them something of substance, then that's how we change the paradigm. And the importance is, saying you're only working with high school kids is missing 30% of the talent pool out there in this age group. Many of the kids, because they craved relevance, walked. Right. And they thought they'd be able to do it with their own ingenuity. They heard stories like Bill Gates, who made millions because he was just brilliant and was creative. He didn't need paper to prove that. They just weren't proven that it was right.
Jonas, I know we're coming up on the time here. The fact of the matter is, times have changed. Business is different, but it's this. Caterpillar's not opening up brand new factories in Georgia, in Texas, in North Carolina, around the world, just to not advance manufacturing. It's a balance. We ship 8 out of 10 of houses on wheels out of Central Illinois and Decatur, Illinois, that get sold around the world. The fact of the matter is, five years ago, we have more Chinese competitors that have entered the market than we ever thought we would have, coming in at a price point where you can buy 2 for 1. And the way we have to deal with that is a balanced approach, right? 1, keeping relevant jobs here in America, but the fact is times are different. You have to make things smarter. but you also have a global manufacturing footprint. 55,000 jobs here, 70,000 abroad. That's who we are, but we keep that balance when we're going, and we all have to be nimble. And I think what you're hearing right now is that from an education perspective, you have to have an open ear to what the reality is on the shop floor, if I would say that, within academia.
Yeah, I think in summary what I'm hearing is there are structural changes occurring which we will have to address to reduce the threat and the actual existence of high unemployment or youth unemployment in particular, so that we have young people coming out who are work ready and not only graduate ready, and that will require different levels of collaboration and cooperation between government, educational institutions and private enterprise to make sure that we approach this in a new way so we can create sustainable jobs as well as remain competitive as a nation. So with that, thank you to my fellow panelists and thank all of you.